Alrighty. Pablo, welcome to the show.
Hello, Alan. Thank you for having me.
I'm so looking forward. I was so looking forward to this conversation for a long time, and I think we'll uncover why in a bit. But maybe first, for the listeners, if you could explain a little bit about what is Penpot, because I asked some of our alumni, "Have you heard of Penpot?" and most didn't. So I think let's first shed light on your company.
Absolutely. So, Penpot is a product. The company behind Penpot is Kaleidos.
Mm.
We also do another open source project called Taiga, which has been out there for a number of years. But Penpot specifically is an open source, open standards design and prototyping tool. It's web-based, real-time collaboration, all the things that you would expect from a design prototyping tool for designers, with a twist in that we do welcome developers into the design process. Like, it's the tool that developers would have been, should have been using for a number of years, but were kept out because somehow other design tools decided that designers should work separately from developers, or developers should be working separately from designers. So Penpot is like the first design prototyping tool that really brings them together. And it was born 2 years ago, like seriously full-time team effort. And we just announced our official launch. So that means we're no longer beta. I think when we first chat, we were beta still. I'm sure that happened because that was a few weeks ago. But that's now out of the way. We did that recently, and we are now experiencing again one of those very delightful breaking moments where you see all your metrics spike
up and to the right.
Yeah.
We'll get to this, but first, I think somebody listening may say, "But wait, like Figma is also inviting to developers. It's like it's built for me designing something and handing it over to developers in an easy manner." So, specifically, how does Penpot try to achieve being more friendly to developers?
Well, I would argue that if you asked developers whether Figma welcomes them, I think they would say not really. We are using the tool, but we're not enjoying the tool. But yeah, absolutely, there are developers using Figma. But you said hand over. I think that's the issue there. Why should designers hand over, like, specifically a deliverable to developers? Why not the developers should be part of the design process, taking as it is being designed whatever they needed with no handover? Our approach here is that design is already the code is already designed, and so you look at a design artifact or an asset or an abstraction, and you can inspect the code that it also represents. There's different ways to look at the same object. In that way, designers and developers are actually real-time collaborating together, and you don't see that happening in other tools like Figma. Like, developers are waiting for their time, and Penpot is like, there's no handoff. There's no moment where you say, "Look, I finished. You come here, and I'll explain everything and you will, copy and paste some stuff, export some other things, and you can then do your work." Penpot is like, you're already here. You've been here from the very beginning. You're inspecting code as we design. We have things like flex layout. So, of course, the design flows the same way as the code, because the code, the CSS code, is already informing the design. And we have been having this conversation since day one, and there's no specific point in time where a designer needs to say, now is the time for you to come here and understand. So it is about flow. It is about team dynamics, and that is what will keep making Penpot so much different to other design-only or designer-centric tools.
Does this feature, the fact that you can work on this together, does it come at the expense of any features that designers love? Is there a trade-off built into this?
From what designers have been telling us, the answer would be no. They actually, some features like flex layout, where you have this set of smart rules that make the content flow the way you want, have been top priority in terms of feature requests for the tools for a number of years. So I remember when 2 years ago we launched our alpha, and the community asked to have real-time support for right-to-left support, right-to-left languages, so RTL. So languages like Hebrew, Arabic, or Farsi, or some dialects in Hindi.
Right.
And we were able to ship that in a month, whereas Figma hadn't done that for a number of years. So people sometimes do ask very clearly for things they need, but then they don't get the proper answer from the product. That was, for some people, an anecdote, like, oh, so we ask for stuff and you deliver quickly, thanks to the fact that you're using open standards and the browser technology. So that's great. That's to our advantage. With Flex Layout, it happened exactly the same, but of course it was massively different because everyone wanted Flex Layout, and they have been asking this to other tools for years, and they have been told it's not a priority for us. And the reason it was not a priority for other tools was because they deeply believe that designers should stay isolated in these ivory towers with designer-only abstractions. But our surveys and our beta testing program showed that not every, but 99% of designers were actually looking forward to this. Because what a designer wants to achieve at the end of the day is for their design to not be interpreted, just be taken as it is by developers. And this definitely speeds up that process. So what's not to love about this?
We'll get to the open standard, open source part in a bit. I would love to dive deeper into it. But first, let me just tell you a story how I even learned about Penpot. So a few weeks back, Adobe acquired Figma. It's still in the process, but it's going to happen. So then, I saw the hate around the acquisition and the backlash of the community. And slowly, like 5 days later, news started to come out about other services, namely like Penpot was mentioned. Saw a huge uptick in the signups.
Yes.
Like people were like, "Oh, I don't want to use Figma anymore. I'm going to use something else." So maybe first of all, like how did you see this? So how did it actually happen this way, or is it just like misreported? And why do you think there was a huge increase in signups when this happened, when this news broke?
Yeah, so that was September 15th. We cannot forget that date at the company. We were enjoying an off-site event. So the whole company was in this, rural environment, enjoying some workshops and making decisions around what to do next for the next year. And then someone said, "Do you know what just happened?" Like with his smartphone during lunch, and everyone was really cheering. Why? Because it was in a very immature market. It's not fragmented at all, really, for design and prototyping. Just not even a handful. It's like 2 or 3 tools. That's it. 2 of them had merged, meaning that the company that owns 7% of the market, Adobe, with Adobe XD, had acquired the tool that owned 80% of the market, which was Figma, meaning that we got an even less fragmented space and therefore a much bigger opportunity to disrupt that space. People have been telling us for years, do not dare to go against Figma.
Mhm.
It's an uphill battle that you cannot win. And we would always say, what are you saying? Why is everyone already conceding this battle about open standards, about free collaboration, about designers and developers? Why is people so that was a huge uptick. Yes, it didn't get misrepresented at all. We were growing already very decently, month over month, I have to say. But of course, we cannot compete with a 20 billion deal in terms of
Mhm.
marketing. I mean, that was massive. But most interestingly, other than the numbers, like, and we grew, I don't know, 500,000% in self-host instances, or we had all, we basically had to redo our scales for our metrics, right? Because they were now legacy. It was not the numbers, it was why people were coming to Penpot, what they were saying. And what these people were saying, and many journalists did not did not understand, was they were really emotionally stressed by the
Mm.
news. Of all the possible acquirers for Figma, the most hated one could only be Adobe. And
Yeah.
Adobe had acquired Figma, despite the fact that Figma had declared itself a few years ago the anti-Adobe design tool. So I would tell journalists that were really happy to interview me at the time, still are. But at the time, the important thing was the acquisition. Nowadays, the important topic is Penpot itself, which is a
Mm.
nice change. So this is something like Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars would have hired or recruited Princess Leia. Imagine the rebellion, that is really a treacherous move, the least expected one.
Yeah.
But 20 billion is a lot of money, I guess. And we might go into why Adobe did that, at some point. But basically, what we saw was people really wanting a way out of that
Yeah.
trap, waiting a way out of monopolistic practices, a way out of a toxic brand, a way out of greedy brand, a way out to make sure that they would have a future-proof ownership of their designs and work. And that hasn't really faded away. It's
Mhm.
it's not one of those cases where people erupt in discontent, and then a month or a week later, everyone's cool. You can still feel the rage.
Mhm.
Uh, so we're still benefiting from that, but of course we don't want to get people to Penpot just because they hate Adobe or Adobe plus Figma. We want people to come to Penpot because they really value what we're building.
Right. But let's go into the reason that Adobe had to buy Figma, because I think it will also explain a little bit about maybe the position that Penpot is in terms of how Penpot plans to compete with Figma and Adobe now that they are basically in the same pot, so to say, no pun intended. But look, if we look at this from a bird's eye perspective, so there's a huge company that has hundreds of billions in market cap, Adobe, right?
Yes.
That could not compete with Figma, right? They could not figure out how they could actually, disrupt this fast-growing startup. They tried and they copied their product with Adobe XD. They've tried, I don't know, acquiring other companies and so on. They didn't succeed. In the end, they just paid a huge price for acquiring Figma. So first, maybe let's go into why you think Adobe decided and had to, I think you even use this word, had to buy Figma. And then on the flip side, what makes you think you will be able to, compete with the two?
Yeah, I think the answer lies into the fact that the reason Adobe acquired Figma explains why we are going to be successful. So they're actually quite intertwined. I'll try to explain that. So this is purely speculative on my side, but Adobe could not compete against Figma for various reasons. One of them is that in design world, winner takes all. It has been like that for a couple of decades, meaning that designers will flock massively to the next cool tool, and then when that's exhausted, they go to the next one. It's not something I've seen developers do. Developers, I think, do enjoy a much more diverse set of tools. That's my background in physics and computer science, and I've been enjoying a number of options for a number of tools in my kit. But for some reason in design space that doesn't happen. So you typically have like a massive leader in a category and then fades away and then someone replaces that. So probably Adobe was very well aware of that, saying we know how this works, we know how the psychology of designers work and the business. So we cannot overtake Figma at this point. You know, we are the past. We cannot be the future. Mm-hmm. So, of course, I would read people saying posts saying that only Figma and Penpot were actually innovating at a fast pace these days. That was well before the acquisition happened. People in the know would say Adobe XD is not actually innovating. They are, so they are slow, and Adobe has a ton of money, and probably they have a super big team. Despite that, they would not innovating. Only Figma and Penpot would be doing that, even for a better product. For Penpot, people will say that. So I guess they would have some operational challenges there also. And then I think the main reason here for Adobe to be excited about acquiring Figma was something that Figma promised. What did Figma promise in exchange for $20 billion? My suspicion is that Figma promised the whole developer world, not the design world, not the designers world, but the developers world, which Adobe hasn't ever had a chance to get into. And it's at least 10 times as big as designers. Now the audience is much bigger. So I can picture that negotiation, room with people at Figma saying, "I can give you something you will never have, which is 10 times what you would ever, dream having, which is developers." Now, every developer right now listening to this would say, "But that's bullshit because Figma doesn't own developers." Mm-hmm. That's actually something we commented at the beginning. Like, Figma does not excite developers. Who cares? You're promising stuff. You might not be able to deliver that. But that's probably what is behind $20 billion. A decade-long strategy to win over the hearts of developers. Because to be honest, the rate at which Figma could continue to grow when you have 80% of designers is negligible. I mean, you can build on top of that in terms of business, like more revenue streams, more products, and I'm sure Adobe could teach one or two things, to Figma and how to expand for the same audience, more revenue streams for a suite. But in terms of how many designers are using your product, I think Figma could not continue to grow very much unless they untapped the developer audience, but really untapped the developer audience. So Penpot comes from a very, very different approach, which is designers and developers should work together from the very beginning. Penpot is a design and prototyping tool, first and foremost, for designers, but is already welcoming, onboarding developers into the design process in a way that's quite neat, because it's not obvious at first sight how much a developer is going to enjoy or benefit from that. They will go there to take what they need at first and just will be like pinging and that. But we are already seeing those teams more tightly coupled within Penpot. Like the developer it keeps staying more and more time there because it's also a nice productivity tool for them. It speaks its language, their language. Like they can inspect code. They can. It's not trying to disrespect them in terms of the vocabulary used, like the abstractions, the user experience, the whole onboarding process is much fine by them, I guess.
Yeah.
And so we don't need to pivot. It's a design prototyping tool to make sure developers really enjoy the experience. And of course, developers do love open source and do love how to hack into the tool,
Right.
integrate that tool into the DevOps, GitOps, etc. So at the end of the day, the question that people might want to ask themselves, including you, Alan, is who is going to win over the developers' hearts for the next couple of years?
Yeah, that's so interesting because it's so like unintuitive. You're designing a design tool, but in order to win, it almost seems like I need to win developers. And what I like about your approach is because you're open source, you kind of need to win developers because they will help you also build the next version and the next version of the tool, right?
Well, there are various reasons why we need to do that. One that people might be considering is, of course, that allows you to have more contributions, more innovation distributed across the globe. Like you really, in open source, you have to be very generous. You need to be generous. You need to go into the altruistic game theory pattern. Otherwise, you're fake, right? But in return, you get so much tailwind. People really adding, contributing, whether it's translation or actual core code, you can see the excitement of people contributing to the product. But there's also a more strategic move for us there, because what we want is to make sure that designers really get much more power and agency when they are working on where they're building software or whatever they're building. And this is something that I've called the hidden agenda at some point. Our hidden agenda is how to make sure designers only win when developers enjoy the design process, because the risk there is for developers to take over whatever they are offered. That's what we do. That's what we always do. We are massive. We are, like in numbers, we outnumber every other audience. And we have enjoyed that exclusive privilege of just overruling, taking over any space that we offered. We know how to automate. We know how to scale up. We know how to engineer everything. So the tricky part here for us is we're going to make sure developers are welcome to the design process. And at the same time, those developers are going to, not reluctantly, but actually willingly, give away part of the power that they have to designers to balance, to have a better balance in terms of power dynamics in teams, within teams. The only way you can hope to achieve that, and I hope people really are following me here, is for developers to enjoy the design process, to really enjoy it, to appreciate it, to appreciate the research that goes into it, to appreciate the work that goes into it, the science, but also the pure creativity. And for them to enjoy, they need to be part of that space, respectfully, but part of that space. As long as developers stay away from that, are kept at the bay, they're going to make assumptions of that, and they're going to judge, or better put, prejudge about that. So I think it's in the designer interest that we make that transition to developers as soon as possible, without, of course, making developers now the new kings and queens of the design process, because then that would be so wrong. But we are very well aware of that, and we're making sure that's not the case.
How are you making sure that's not the case?
Because the design and prototyping tool is first and foremost something, the whole user journey, UX, and the value that you get is basically for designers. So that, developers might get 20% of value, a very, very high quality one, but it's designers that will get 80% of the tool.
So I recently read that you raised, what was it, 12 million round? That was in the beginning of February. And I think in total, Penpot raised 20 million in investments. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the question I'm trying to get to is okay, so you're saying that the business model of Penpot is open source, and usually open source companies, either don't get 12 million investments or just they decide to not go through this route. So for me, it's almost like, oh, that's interesting. So this company is trying to do both. So help me understand, and with this also listeners, how are you thinking of the business model? Because right now, if I'm not mistaken, I can just use the tool for free. It's just there. I can just pick it up. I can just sign up and use it, and I don't pay anything for it. So
yeah,
basically, I would like to know about the monetization plan and what's the story that the investors are buying into.
Absolutely. So frequently asked question number one that we got a few months ago was, when are you going to have auto layout? And then I'll migrate. And we actually came out with Flex Layout, which is much better. And we are going to release Grid Layout soon. And we will have different layout systems. You pick the one you want. But the second frequently asked question that we get is, are you going to monetize this? Some people would ask that question coming from different backgrounds. Like some people say, I care too much now for Penpot. Please tell me you have a plan. But other people would genuinely want to understand the business model, like the monetization strategy, not only from a sustainability point of view, but actually from a successful business point of view. And we've always said the same thing over and over and over. We might rephrase it, we might clarify it, but it's already there from the very beginning. We come from a company. We are a company. We've been a company for 12 years. Kaleidos was born in 2011. And we have been using technology and our talent for services and consulting services for 10 years. So we had clients come to us and ask for our talent for a very challenging technological project. Perhaps it was a startup or a big corporation. And we would be very clear about what type of projects we would accept, because we are not here to do just whatever. We are here to make sure that we build great technology that has a positive impact in society. So when we transitioned to an open source, and by the way, the company was called Kaleidos Open Source. That's the full name of the company. When we transitioned to an open source product company, we ask ourselves the same question. Okay, what's the money we are going to be happy taking, and for what reason? And what we decided is we'll have an open source business model. That means that in our case, that power users are highly active users, whether they are designers or developers that really have a very intense usage of the tool, will always have the tool open source. Everything's going to be open source and it's going to be free. Regardless of you picking the SaaS that we have a cloud deployment that you can go sign up and that's it, or you self-host it. We don't care. You can self-host Penpot, you can go to our SaaS. That's going to be free forever. free forever, and open source. So the code will be available as it is right now under a Mozilla Public License 2.0 for those of you that are into licensing. So that's an MPL 2.0. Now, at some point in the next couple of years, we will figure out exactly what enterprises want from their Penpot workspace. Things that power users don't care about, but companies really need to have. There will be things like compliance, reporting, insights, policy, application. Like, yeah, you can do anything, you can create any project, you can invite anyone, except the company doesn't allow you to do that. And that you will have to pay for. To be able to control the features or the dynamics of the team, you will have to pay for. I'll give you an example. Penpot will have two-factor authentication for signups. You can set that up. But if as a company, you really want that to be the only way to sign up or log in, you have to pay.
Right.
So we call this model a tax the controller model. And basically what it's trying to do is to make sure that people that can contribute with time, content, or code, the type of people that would do that, even if you particularly are not doing it, but if you belong to that audience, you belong to the power user audience, and you get everything open source, everything free. But if you are a manager or a executive or a corporation, like an abstract corporation that needs something extra and cannot contribute with anything else than money, then you pay. And that should be transparent, completely transparent, not in terms of being clear. Of course, everything will be clear as everything, as always for us, but also self-host and SaaS. You will pay the same or mostly the same, whether you go for the Enterprise Edition of Penpot self-host, the Enterprise Edition on our cloud. And we've been very clear about this, what the power user mean and what the enterprise user mean. And so far, it looks like it's the simplest, most valid open core business model that we can think of.
Nice. And who is maybe an analogous example or analogous, let's say,
there are many.
Role model? Is it like Red Hat from Linux or?
Not exactly. Red Hat has a different approach. I actually was having a chat with a friend of mine, Pilar Bravo. She's in Madrid and Red Hat Iberia. And they have a different model because it's more like if you're a company, you have to abide by this other license, and it's different. It's the whole product. You need to pay for the whole product.
Right.
So it's not exactly the same. No, I think the closest would be tools like, I guess, GitLab. That would be a fine example where they very cleverly, I guess, identified the benefits of specific features for those type of different buyer type personas. So they don't really care much about the organization type or the size of the organization. They only care about who has the budget to ask for which specific features that bring value. And I think they made some mistakes along the way, but overall, they were successful in very clearly identifying which bucket, is it the open source or the enterprise, do features come to, right? For us, we have a very simple flow of questions. If you get 3 no's to 3, consecutive questions, most likely it'll go into open source. But if something like that, it's very simple, and it's one rule that follows. Something that was open source at some point stays open source forever.
Yeah. I mean, so to play the devil's advocate, but also maybe more like to play the role of a business designer here is like, if I would be putting this together, I would want to know Okay, so instead of selling 1 million licenses, right? You
Mm-hmm.
said before Figma has 1 million licenses, and each of them costs this and this, and this basically then adds up to their monthly revenue. So I'm essentially losing, in a way, in business sense, like 90% of users that would pay for it, but I'm only focusing on the 10%, which is the enterprise, I don't know, cases. So have you done any math in terms of like, okay, if we just go with enterprises, this is still enough to kind of be a sustainable business model that could disrupt Figma, and in that way we can also sustain over a longer period of time and kind of be here to provide the value to our audiences, designers and developers.
Yeah, as I said, my background is in physics, and we have
You've done the numbers.
we've done the numbers. They're actually quite trivial to do. The key idea behind how to approach this is a very simple value created, value captured ratio.
Mm-hmm.
Typically for proprietary software, you create value. Creating value is making sure your users have some obvious gain, right, by using your software. And you can put a number to that. You can say that's equivalent to, I don't know, $1,000 per year. Like if you're a designer and using a tool, you can say, thanks to this tool, I was able to earn, to get $1,000. How much would you be willing to pay for that software? That's the value capture. The value creation is 1,000. The value capture is how much? 100, 500, 900, 10,000. Of course, 10,000 doesn't make sense, but up to 1,000 that you're getting out, how much? And typically, what studies reveal is that people are okay paying up to 20% of the value created. So in that case, you would be fine paying $200 per year for a tool that gives you 1,000 in return, right? So that's a profit of 800. So proprietary software follows that trend. They need to create so much value for so many people in order to then capture up to 20%. I mean, of course, you can do with less than that. Cloud services try to be super optimized, and perhaps they are fine if you only capture 10%. At the beginning, they'll be happy with 5%, and they go up in fees and pricing changes. I think people can picture that. But basically, you have a sales team that makes sure that for everyone out there, you try and capture that 20%.
Right.
But open source is different. The approach is different. Most of the people are not going to pay you anything anytime, like ever. So typically the ratio here is that you can only capture 1% or even less than that, 0.5% of the value you create on average per user. So if you want to have any decent business metrics with that really silly conversion rate in terms of capture, you need to have a huge value creation pipeline.
Right.
And for an open source product, to achieve that, you need to be really relevant, basically. You need to really be a category leader because you are being extremely generous. You're giving away so much that the only way you can hope to get something in return, even with that tiny ratio I just mentioned, like 1%, let's just go for 1%, you're going to need that 100 to be massive, like worldwide footprint. So not every open source product belongs to the category of being massive. Yeah, there's some tools that are just going to be niche forever. So, I mean, if your competitor is also niche, then you can sort of say, okay, but it's the same. Their worldwide footprint is my worldwide footprint. Does Penpot belong to the worldwide footprint type of product? I would argue it does. I would argue that Penpot is meant for software teams, cross-functional teams, designers, developers, product managers, stakeholders, marketing people, content creators. So I would argue that we have the potential to be so big that whenever we ask for that 0.5 or 1% value capture in fees, that is still a very exciting business for us. And that is why we are not at all concerned about pricing right now, because we have to prove so much before we even ask for money. We have to make sure that we have that value creation really up and to the right.
I'm glad you found VCs that understand this, because it's a very powerful new paradigm.
That was the toughest. That was the toughest move. We are open source, and we are the tool is quite challenging to develop, so that attracts attention. It's also about design and prototypes. It's as a developer tool. Open source design, what is that? That's a nice blend. So you could imagine how many venture capital firms would knock on the door. It would be so distracting. I really had tons of meetings, and most of them would not get this. They would be initially excited about the prospects of having in their portfolio such a nice poster child, I guess. But then when you got into the business model, the fact that they had to wait so long, they would start asking questions that would only make sense for proprietary SaaS, really, for closed source software. And would say, you're not getting it. We need to be patient. We need to build this. We need to prove a ton of stuff before we ask for money. Are you in or not with this long-term strategy? And most of them would say, they wouldn't ever say no, but they would say not yet, right?
Yeah. It's the usual. Come back in a year with new metrics and let's talk again.
Yeah, I'd say, okay, yeah. But and then I would say, you come back in a year or so and prove your worth too. So yeah, I think we are really happy to have Decibel. They're an open source VC. You can look at their portfolio and you'd see that, 90% of their companies are open source. And when I would ask some other founders their experience with them, they would say, don't look elsewhere. These people really get it. And so far, yeah, they are tremendous help and support.
Last question, Pablo. Where can our designers download the app and try it out?
Well, you just go to penpot.app, and the easiest way is you just create a SaaS account. You can invite your team, you do the onboarding. But if you know about Docker, you can self-host it. So you can very simply just one click, so Docker pull, and that's it, Docker run. And also there are some other options for your on-premise as a service with our friends at Elestio, so that elest.io, if you want to have your own SaaS model, but like private. So no need to download, although there is a community contribution that encapsulated Penpot as a desktop app for all operating systems. So if you look for desktop app and Penpot, you can also get the native experience, although that is not really meant for teams. I guess that's more for like the solo player, which is fine. But yeah, penpot.app, and then please go to community.penpot.app and join there, because there's a really vibrant community discussing everything around design and code, collaboration, open source, open standards. It's really fun to be there.
Thank you very much, Pablo. That was very, very intriguing. I think inspiring to all of us.
Thank you, Alan. That was great.